Hi, remember to like and subscribe to my channel and hit the notification bell for future content. Thank you for watching.
Peterhead fishing boat Sapphire foundered on Wednesday the 1st of October 1997 with the loss of 4 of her crew. She was thought to be lying on the seabed at a depth of some 300 feet. No bodies had been recovered. This film is the story of the quest to raise the Sapphire and to bring home the bodies of her lost crewmen home for burial. The weather conditions during the search for the Sapphire were excellent, and she was found lying on her starboard side in a sandy hollow on the seabed some 12 miles east of Peterhead.
On completion of the location program and the inspection for the MEIB, I was contacted by representatives of the trust representing the families of the men lost on the Sapphire, and they requested that I put together a feasibility study identifying the best options available for the recovery of the Sapphire.
With the authorization and cooperation of the Marine Accident Investigation Board, Dronick was able to quickly prepare a report based on data compiled during the search for the Sapphire.
When we go out on site, it's our intention to do the lift through the water column of 85 metres in one go. Previous instructions might have led you to believe we would do it in 2 or 3 options. And the discussions in Rotterdam have led us to an understanding that it is now possible to raise it through the 85 metres in one lift.
The report concluded that it was indeed feasible to raise the Sapphire. It recommended a diverless operation involving a salvage barge with a huge sheer legs crane. Dronick costed the operation at £380,000. This was based on chartering the Smith vessel Tak Lift VII, which at the time had just completed work in the Firth of Forth.
Based on the information that we had been given that the Sapphire was full of fish at the time, taking her dead weight and the lift through 87 metres of water, we were expecting to be subjected to some very heavy weights in the initial lift, and that was far easier to control with a lifting barge of the style of Tak 4 or Tak 7 than a semi-sub light regalia.
Amid a clamour of emotionally charged and lengthy public and parliamentary debate, the government declined to finance the salvage operation. In the meantime, the weather window was closing, and the widows, supported by their trustees, launched an appeal for the funds required to raise the Sapphire and recover the bodies of their menfolk. At an emotional press conference with the relatives of the missing crewmen, they announced that their target was to raise the money before the weekend deadline to charter Smith's lifting barge, the Tak Lift VII. The response from the public and the major oil companies working in the North Sea was immediate and generous. Within days, the appeal passed its target. Dronick was given the go-ahead to charter the massive Dutch lifting barge.
The weather on completion of inspection and location leading into raising the Sapphire was, again, very, very favourable for submersible operations. It was extremely difficult to allow the client, in this case, to understand that there are limitations on weather windows and sea states when doing a lift of this nature. At the time the recommendations went forward, we had Tak Lift IV sitting in the Forth. The weather was perfectly calm, ideal sea conditions, and we were rather disappointed when we were placed in a position, having given all the data that was required, not to be allowed to continue that operation at that time and to be enforced into a long delay.
This delay of some 10 days in funding and mobilizing the operation turned out to have quite a catastrophic effect. There then followed a period of mobilization and preparatory work, raising the sheer legs and lifting gear ready to get underway to sail. However, it became quite clear on the 14th of November that some severe weather was on the way. Barges like the Tak Lift IV are unstable in severe weather when the shear legs are up. The decision was taken to remain in harbour until the weather improved. In fact, it became increasingly worse, necessitating moving berths from the Marina Quay across to the Asco base, where there was more protection. However, this delay was put to good use, enabling the recovery team to visit vessels similar to the Sapphire, familiarizing themselves with the layout. The severe hurricane-force winds continued for several days. During this time, the operations support tug, the Viking Bank, made several sorties out to the recovery site to assess conditions. The massive Tak Lift IV remained in port, looming over the fishing boats in the harbour. She was a constant reminder that just 12 miles offshore, 4 men lie victims to their harsh livelihood. In the better weather, when the boat went down, the recovery operation could have been carried out in less than 48 hours. Now, the weather windows of opportunity were closing fast.
Tuesday, 2 meters, 2.5 meters. Outlook Thursday, 2.5, 3 meters, lowering to 1.5 on Friday. So
It means as well is going down.
Rapidly, but we have to be patient.
The barge eventually sailed for the scene of the wreck on Saturday the 22nd of November.
okay, for the moment 11 o'clock, and then when changing things I call you back.
An ROV inspection of the Sapphire confirmed that she was still lying intact on the seabed. The operation was called off at 0600 hours on Sunday the 23rd of November.
Yeah, around 11. Well, it's okay. We give you a shout when we are an hour off.
Weather conditions with swells in excess of 6 meters made it too risky to continue.
Lifting in heavy weather causes rapid movements of the barge. That is accentuated up the length of its A-frame. Therefore, 2 inches of movement on the seabed, by the time the shear legs move the 2 inches through the rocking of the vessel and the movement on the surface, that's accentuated to very rapid, severe jerks on the wires that are placed around the Sapphire for the purpose of lifting.
The barge returned to port on the 24th. On the 25th, the trustees of the Sapphire Fund decided that extra cash was needed to provide some leeway in covering the ongoing operating costs of the lifting barge Tak Lift VII. An appeal for an extra £100,000 was made to provide a safety net. Once again, the public and businesses alike responded immediately and generously. One of the more high-profile donations was a personal pledge of £25,000 to the fund from Virgin boss Richard Branson. Frustrated by continuing hurricane-force winds, the barge then remained in harbour until the 29th of November. Then, just as the Tak Lift IV was preparing to sail, the wind strengthened and moved more towards the north. The deteriorating weather postponed mobilization once again. The following day, almost exactly 2 months since the Sapphire went down, the weather improved, and on Sunday the 30th, the decision was taken to sail. The Tak Lift IV slipped out to sea just as the sun was rising. For the first time in 2 weeks, the sun was shining. The mood on board was optimistic. 7 miles out, the conditions began to worsen. The operation, however, continued with the barge anchoring in position, ready to begin lifting the following morning. Overnight, there was a further deterioration in the weather, and by morning the sea became a maelstrom of lumpy water and a cocktail of horizontal spray and driving snow. The decision was taken to return to port amidst much talk from the crew of a jinx and ancient seafaring superstitions.
We had the pleasure of having very experienced masters with us, and on a number of occasions I noticed that they, as well as myself, were questioning the reliability of what we were doing. It did seem that we were in the middle of a depression, constantly hovering around our operation. It was brought further to our attention as we would move to the west a couple of miles and identify that the weather pattern had dramatically increased to the better. And of course, on one occasion, we turned around and went back to the work site, having identified this weather window, whereupon we were immediately hit once again by this depression which was hanging around the work site. Under normal operational conditions, the movement that is accentuated by the rolling and pitching of a surface vessel increases as the weather increases. And the fact that we had wires round the hull of the Sapphire, and the depth being 87 metres, our priority was to ensure that we raised the Sapphire back to the surface, knowing that she was intact and in one piece, to bring her to the surface intact and in one piece.
If the barge had been caught out in severe weather, with the Sapphire in the lifting slings, it could have broken apart and been lost, along with the bodies, forever. On her way back to port, the Tak Lift IV received word that she was needed to work on a contract in Denmark. On the 2nd of December, she was replaced by the slightly smaller Tak Lift VII. The changeover was completed in port during a period of calm. The new barge sailed for the recovery site at 1500 hours on the 3rd of December. There, with relatively calm weather, everything went according to plan, until, with the Sapphire moved into an upright position, a lifting wire snagged after becoming entangled in the Sapphire's mast. It sheared, forcing the Tak Lift VII to abandon the lifting operation. There was no alternative but to return to port and re-rig the wire. Once again, the weather deteriorated.
We never believed that we would have to abandon it completely. We did consider on a number of occasions delaying the whole operation until the following year, when the weather conditions would have been a lot more acceptable. The reason we did not progress that any further was during the course of the Sapphire operation, the crew of Viking Bank and the crew of Tak 7 and indeed Tak 4 were were in agreement that they were doing this for the families. They wanted to ensure that they gave it their best shot.
It was not until 1540 hours on the 9th of December that the barge was able to put to sea again. On site, the anchors were laid in darkness during the latter part of the afternoon, and the Tak Lift VII remained at anchor until the 10th of December. The various wires were positioned ready for doing a lift over a 24-hour period into the 11th of December. On the 11th, further efforts were made to put down wires on the Sapphire's stern. The weather forecast from the Coast Guard was reasonable. Work continued straight through the night until the 12th. On the morning of the 12th, there was a heavy swell running, and it was decided to delay works until later in the afternoon. In the meantime, the ROV continued its finely tuned task of running wires and managed to get both strops down and in place.
The teamwork involved in a lift of this nature is extensive, and it involves operating the tug in conjunction with the lifting barge. And it was necessary for us to place the wires on the seabed at the stern of the vessel, one wire from the lifting barge and a further wire from the Viking Bank. The ROV then had to hook up both wires, having placed one of the wires initially through the propeller guard and the rudder. Having hooked up both wires together, the Viking Bank then pulled in on her wires and the Tak 4 eased out on the other end of the wire until the main lifting wire had gone all the way down to the seabed through the rudder guard and back up to the Viking Bank. As soon as the wire was on the Viking Bank, it was then placed back to the Tak Lift VII, and control was then back with the lifting barge. The wire was continually fed down at a very slow pace and up the other side and then further over the roller bars on the A-frame until the position was right and that the lifting sling was in place. Having secured the stern wire, the weight was taken off the stern of the Sapphire. She was gently lifted and a second wire was placed underneath the keel. And exactly the same process takes place where the wire is pulled under the keel to the front end of the Sapphire. And again the wire is passed back to the Tak Lift VII. Having secured both wires, it's a matter of gently taking the strain and ensuring that both lift wires are in an exact position to balance the casualty in the sling. During the initial positioning of the Tak Lift VII, we had to get assistance from a Peterhead fishing boat to come out and take one of the crew members off, who had to be repatriated back to Holland urgently as his daughter was taken into hospital.
Misfortune struck again, with one of the crew becoming quite ill. For a time it looked as if the barge might have to return to port. However, the Peterhead lifeboat came out and took him back to port for treatment.
It is always difficult to separate from the family issue and the emotional issue and the commercial issue. But there is absolutely no doubt that everybody on board Viking Bank, Tak Lift VII and Dronnick's crew were feeling exactly the same. And those feelings were that we were determined to complete the operation. As more obstacles hit us in the way of weather, we were even more determined to overcome those obstacles. And indeed, knowing that Christmas was also approaching, we were even more determined to get it complete before Christmas.
Preparatory operations continued on, right through until the morning of the 14th. Then, at 0730 hours, with everyone happy with the position of the strops, that the wires were in place and that the Sapphire was secured, the decision was taken to start the lift from the seabed.
Having taken it from the seabed, we understood that the Sapphire was indeed a lot lighter than what we expected. And the lift through the 87 metres continues until she is approximately 30 metres below the surface. At that point we deploy air divers and secure the lifting wires to the actual hull by means of clamps and further blocks and tackles and wire shackles. She is then lifted to sea level and drained as far as possible on that point. We never lift them straight out of the water. They're always left in the water because it makes a lot easier for handling and keeps a lot of weight in the slings to give stability.
The Sapphire finally broke surface at around 12 minutes after 11, after a very slow lift up through 87 metres of water.
It's a very eerie moment, and I have felt exactly the same emotion on each occasion when I've done these lifts. It is a strange feeling of remorse to see the vessel so helpless, which used to be a powerful fishing vessel. The emotion of watching the water throw her around and batter her is again a feeling of despair.
The sea swell was beginning to increase again, and there was now a major problem in getting inside the vessel. The decision was taken to inform the Coast Guard, ASCO base and the police that the barge was bringing the Sapphire into Peterhead harbour to continue the search in safety for the missing crewman. The Tak Lift VII arrived back in Peterhead at 6:25 p.m. on the evening of the 14th. Work continued right through the evening, and by 25 minutes past midnight, in the morning of the 15th, the bodies of all 4 of the crew members had been recovered.
And of course, on the evening, having reached Peterhead and identified that we had completed our task in total, having recovered all the crewmen, we were overjoyed at that point. We were not overjoyed with the task we had to fulfill, but we were overjoyed that we had complete the job.
The decision was taken to get some rest with a view to sailing later in the day to return the Sapphire to the site where she had gone down.
We had a very tight weather window, which we identified over a period of days, and that moment of lift and the moment of moving was timed precisely to coincide with current changes, weather changes, and the overnight stay in Peterhead was not planned as part of the operation, because we made that decision on a safety basis at the last minute. However, to go back out and put her back where we had found her, everybody on board was feeling rather lethargic. One of the issues that constantly gets raised between ourselves, Dronick, Schmidt, and the masters of these vessels is that we as a company and they as a company involved in salvage and casualty inspections have never ever been asked to raise a vessel from the seabed and place it back in exactly the same position. I find it incredible that we had to go to the extent of recovering the Sapphire only to be told to put it back where we got it.
She remained on course, and preparations to lower the Sapphire continued. But unfortunately, the Tak Lift VII was hit by a heavy swell at around 6:45 p.m.
We were not going to be able to fulfill the task of putting her gently down. I think we all agreed that if we got to the site, we would have to put her down so far and then drop her anyway. However, en route out to the position, the weather continued to deteriorate. It's clearly seen on the video where the Tak VII takes a heavy knock and the Sapphire is put severely against the bow of the Tak VII, which sends her into a bit of a turmoil. She fills with water very rapidly and begins to sink. We place her further in the water to take the strain. The sea is increasing and we took a heavy dip into a trough. The vessel went down, the bow went down, the Sapphire went down at the same time, and one of the wires parted.
The forward sling on the Sapphire broke, releasing her bow, sending her force majeure to the seabed at a position some 2 kilometers southwest from where she had first gone down. For the first time in maritime history, a vessel had been raised and its lost crewmen returned home for burial. Its mission over, the barge returned to Peterhead.
When we returned to Peterhead, the families invited us to a private gathering where they expressed their gratitude to everyone who was involved in the operation. If we were asked again to conduct a recovery program, of course we would accept. I think both Schmidt and Dronick have proved the technical capability of lifting medium depth casualties from the seabed. We would, on the next occasion, take a lot more interest and have a larger say in what was being conducted on shore. I think some of the delays that were created were unnecessary.